I promise this is actually educational, or at the very least not some "she's hot, let me drop some puns" video. I've already done that in my story explained. This video is about why characters like Eve from Stellar Blade are designed the way that they are, but more importantly, why we are drawn to them. We are going to be looking at this from a psychological perspective strictly for science, just raw human psychology, why beauty works, why it sells, why if you're really attractive, little kids will just stare at you, and why beauty has the power to shape the way that we see a character before they even say a word. And yeah, I know the obvious answer when it comes to Eve. We know the obvious answers, but let's go beyond that. People like pretty things, that's why devs do it, it's why it works, but we like pretty because pretty doesn't actually explain much of anything. That's surface level. And while I have to admit there really is nothing wrong with all of that, that's a generally sufficient answer, I want to know why our brains respond this way. Why are we biologically hardwired to notice symmetry, softness, certain silhouettes, curves like backroads? Why is it that characters like Eve grab our attention, but more interestingly, how do they hold it? So if you're into psychological analyses in video games, stab that like button. Dislike buttons help too, as all engagement is engagement, but since you're still here, welcome to the psychology of physical attraction in
Stellar Blade.
Now, before we get down, I want to be clear. This video isn't here to judge or disregard anyone. Attraction is personal. When I was younger, I was all about a girl's physical aspects, but as I got older, I started valuing substance, how a woman carries themselves, their behavior, hobbies, personality, and aspirations. Let me know if this resonates with you, guy or girl. Actually, yeah. What do you guys or gals care about when it comes to your perfect partner? I know a guy who doesn't care what she looks like. He only cares what she cooks, like beef, pork, chicken. I just really wanted to emphasize that obviously there's more to attraction and love than just physical. Beauty standards shift across demographics, cultures, generations, genders, personalities, and experiences, and all of that is valid. Everybody's got their own type, their own self-identifiers, their own preferences. Also, I am not the end-all be-all for what is considered to be attractive or not. This is just what I've learned about societal physical standards. Like how when we take a look at ancient Greek statues or Renaissance paintings, the subjects are often full-bodied, soft, wide-hipped, as those aspects were considered the peak of beauty. That kind of body type meant fertility and health. But if you put those figures into a modern sci-fi game, for an example, I think, and again, I don't speak for everybody, but I don't know if many players would even recognize that as a beauty standard, because the current ideal is completely different than it was back then. And that shift alone shows how much beauty is culturally constructed, even though the psychology underneath it doesn't stop working. But it's not just women, it's the same story for men. Because a long time ago, being heavy was actually a flex. True story. If you were a big boy or you had that SKA build, it meant wealth, power, and that you weren't out breaking your back in the fields. And I bring this up because if you were out working, it meant you were low class. But a fluffy man was often seen as somebody of higher socioeconomic status who had resources to afford food, and they probably didn't even know what a weekend was. But by the time the Great Depression hit in 1929, that image changed fast. What I found was that the ideal man wasn't the chunky man anymore. It was someone who could survive hard times and put in serious labor. And this makes sense. Being overweight wasn't admirable anymore. It was seen as wasteful or out of touch. Like, all of the US is starving, how could you be so selfish and gorge yourself type thing. But today we've shifted again. Now the ideal man is lean, muscular, and hyper fit. Somebody who looks like he gets paid to work out and eat broccoli and chicken. The aesthetics have changed, but the message is still the same. The body is a signal. It reflects what society values in men at any given time. Survival, strength, or control is usually what it is. But I always think it's funny seeing buff guys in the gym getting other guys' attention and not girls. I've also seen that dad bods are becoming a thing. However, the same deal is happening with women when it comes to standards of today. The current ideal pushes for a body that's both lean and curvy, slim thick, flat stomach, narrow waist, wide hips, often with flawless skin and sculpted features. And can we all agree that social media amplifies it constantly? Apps like Instagram and TikTok flood people with edited, filtered, and often surgically enhanced bodies that all follow this very narrow aesthetic. I don't want to dip too much into that whole discussion, but circling back to the main point, even though beauty changes across time, the psychology behind it, the way we associate appearance with worth, is still very much alive. Let's actually break this down. There are a few big reasons why certain physical traits pull our attention. And the wild part is, most of this isn't even on the conscious level. You're likely not sitting there thinking, her facial symmetry activates my evolutionary mating algorithm. It's something that happens. And that is because our brains have been hardwired over thousands of years to respond to certain visual cues. These patterns are rooted in evolutionary biology, psychology, and survival instincts. For example, facial symmetry. That's a huge one. Study after study shows that we naturally find symmetrical faces more attractive. And you might think it's because we like perfection, but it's actually not for that reason. What the data shows is that our brains associate symmetry with health and genetic stability. It's a shortcut in a way, so that you don't have to be weird and ask for medical records or family history, although it is a smart thing to do. But this simply means that evolution has taught you that based on your potential partner's face, you consider that person to have strong genes. And let's sidetrack and take this a bit further, because I want to share this interesting idea with you known in psychology as assortative mating or homogeny. It basically shows that people often end up with partners who resemble them in physical features like facial structure, height, and even body build, even going down to similarities like educational level, socioeconomic status. And I would also note that proximity is also just a natural thing where you're more than likely to end up with somebody who's within your vicinity, maybe even in your city. When I say that out loud, I guess that sounds kind of obvious, but stepping back, studies have found that couples often look physically similar to each other, not just after years of being together, but even when they started dating. What does this mean? It means that people are usually drawn to partners who already resemble them, rather than just growing to look alike over time. And of course, it's not the case for everybody. For an example, like my wife and I come from two different ethnic backgrounds, so there's no way we look the same. You know what I mean? So you might be in a similar case. But again, I love my wife, and we're talking about just in general. Psychologists explain this with the matching hypothesis, which says people pair with those who match their own level of attractiveness or social desirability because it is easier, less risky, and psychologically more comfortable to do so. But let's take it even further beyond. The sexual imprinting hypothesis suggests that as kids, we form mental templates of attractiveness based on our opposite sex parent. That template influences who we find attractive later in life. I bet some of you guys are expecting me to bring up Freud. Keep expecting. One study showed that daughters tend to prefer men with eye colors similar to their fathers. Another found that people rated faces subtly resembling their parents as more attractive, even when they didn't consciously notice it. But there is also emotional closeness with the opposite sex partner. That's another thing. And I don't want this framed or looked at as some kind of creepy fetish. What this actually is an unconscious process that's going on in our minds. Our brains learn familiarity early on, and that generally, familiarity feels safe. If you've seen some of my psychology videos, I often talk about how love and intimacy are filtered through safety. So, men, women, you want to show your partner you love them? Speak to their inner child. Speak to them and watch how they cry tears of joy. Show them that they are safe and they can be themselves with you. That comfort can transfer into attraction when we're older. But I don't want to veer off too much. What all of this is basically saying is that as kids, for a considerable portion of us, we look at our parents when it comes to our relationships and partner preferences. First, we look at the physical and we say, oh, hey, this worked for mom and dad, or These physical attributes successfully resulted in my birth, so I should probably look for somebody who looks like my mom or dad. Again, not the case for everybody. But there's definitely more to this, because we also learn things like how to love or how to receive love from our parents at a young age. If your mother loved your father in a healthy way, you would have probably learned as a woman how to love a man because that was what you learned seeing your mother do it, and that was biologically successful. As a man, you learned this is how a woman should love me, or this is how a man should treat a woman because you saw your father and how he loved your mother. In a successful setting, that's your framework, and it all stems from our innate imperatives. Now, again, I don't want you guys forgetting, there are a lot of nuances, ifs, ands, buts, and in-betweens here, but I hope you're picking up what I'm putting down. The conversation around this is wildly interesting because it always comes back to how we grew up as kids. And just real quick, I have to bring this up because I think it's also very interesting. Is it just me, or do you ever go feral over how good your significant other smells? Like, not perfume or body wash, just them, their actual scent. You ever just turn primal when your nose is on their necks, inhaling them into your chest? I mean, yeah, you're down bad, of course, but that's actually your brain picking up on something called MHC, Major Histocompatibility Complex. It is part of your immune system. And what the research shows is that we're more attracted to the natural scent of people whose MHC genes are different from ours. Why? Because if you had kids together, their immune systems would be stronger. And that's real. There was a study where women smelled t-shirts worn by random dudes, and they consistently picked the ones with the most genetically different immune systems as the best smelling. What does it mean? Your nose is basically out here trying to make super babies, or stronger babies, I guess I could say more aptly, without telling you. I mean, the human body is just crazy in all of the things that it's capable of doing just to make sure that we continue the human species. And while we're here, God, I'm so sorry. It's just overall an interesting conversation, but genetic diversity is a huge factor too. Yeah, pairing up with someone outside of your own ethnic background. There are benefits to dating outside of your race. You could actually give your kids better immune systems, taller average height, better adaptability, and even more symmetrical facial features. It's called heterosis or hybrid vigor. Again, not a universal law, but it shows up across a lot of population studies. But man, where did I leave off? Oh, yeah, body ratios. We got into all of this just based off of the face. Waist to hip ratio. For women, a ratio close to 0.7 tends to be seen as attractive across a bunch of different cultures. 0.7 basically just means wider hips, narrow waist. The male brain connects those birthing hips to things like fertility, youth, and overall reproductive health. And for men, things like shoulder to waist ratio, jawline definition, and height all play into the same idea. That if we end up procreating with this person, then our offspring are going to have a higher chance of success and survival. But along this line, there is also something called the halo effect, where a person's physical beauty makes us assume that they are emotionally or morally superior. Just like when you meet a girl and you think, oh, she's a good girl, she wouldn't do anything wrong, but later on you learn she's actually trouble. Or the same thing with a guy. Oh, this guy's really good looking. He must be an angel. You know what I mean? But after laying down all of this groundwork, we can start to better understand Eve, who is practically an angel. Her design lines up with most of the physical traits people are subconsciously drawn to, the things that we just talked about. Her face is symmetrical, her body proportions fit the general global standard for visual appeal. On top of that, the way she moves is calculated. They're smooth, controlled, and deliberate. The devs programmed her so that you don't see chaos in her posture or behavior. The way she moves can be interpreted as graceful calmness and stability, which makes her more trustworthy and competent. However, again, this isn't solely for the male gaze, because when talking about the developer's goals with her design, I think it's important to note that they tried to make her look like somebody who should be followed and emotionally invested in. Now, stop right there. I know some of you guys are gonna call BS and say, nah, bro, they just made her beautiful because it sells. Yes, true, but also, hear me out. The way I see it, looks are a depreciating asset. Over time, we lose attention or care for something that's just pretty. Again, keywords, just pretty, meaning there's nothing else. Visual novelty fades. Think of games like Soul Calibur or Lollipop Chainsaw, great games in their own rights, but pretty girls alone couldn't keep players. That's why devs couldn't rely on looks alone. They knew they had to make Eve stand out as more than just another pretty face. Players needed a reason to stick with her past the few cutscenes and all the way through the story and even into New Game Plus. I mean, sure, combat is fun, the story exists, but those things can be found in plenty of other games. What makes Eve different is how her visual appeal is directly tied to her emotional depth and her narrative presence. I made a video talking specifically about her psychology, and she does have layers and character development that we see change from the beginning into the end. While her design does irrevocably grab attention, it also reinforces her role in the world and how we relate to her. I'd say that kind of integration between aesthetics and story shows that the developers over at Shift Up understood how player perception works on a deeper level. They understood the psychology behind what the players want. Plus, I mean, guys, the game is biblical. Adam, Eve, of course they're going to look heavenly. It goes without saying that this approach is not unique to Eve. It isn't unprecedented. So, what do I mean by this? I mean, we have other games that have worked in the past as evidence to back this up. Let's look at 2B from Nier Automata or Bayonetta. They both combine idealized physical traits with strong narrative roles. Shift Up saw the blueprints, saw what worked, and didn't try to reinvent the wheel. Lara Croft, another great example. The reason that developers continue to do this is because it consistently creates strong reactions from the fans, of course, leading to sales. Unless you're looking to push your own agenda, I don't know any gamer who doesn't appreciate the blend of visual appeal with competence and emotional presence. It's just like a relationship in real life. We find a woman or a man attractive, but once we get past skin deep, we find out if there is more reason to stay. Are they the full package, or are they just an empty, pretty box? But if you want to see the full dystopian story of Stellar Blade, including the lore, click the video on the screen.
Anyway, how do you say goodbye? May your memories live on forever.